This is Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Chaf, all the learning for this month. The month of El Legend, generously sponsored as an incredible Schos Aliyas Nishama, Fester Rezel Basar Meir, the unimaginable Schos HaTaira, elevating the Nishama of Esther Rezel Basar Meir through the Talmud Torah of the entire Chabura each and every day. And really we're up to Chaf Amud Aleph, but just to go back a moment, Rebbe Eliezer Oimer. 3 lines for the end of Yutes Beis. Rabbi Eliezer is going to teach us, and we're in the middle of discussing, we did this a little bit fast at the end of this year, we're in the middle of discussing whether a father has the ability to sell his daughter to a psulim, and whether he has the ability as well to sell her to Karayvim. So says the Gemara of Lezer Aimer Im Lamed Shamaycha Psulim. If the pasuk is coming to teach us that the father could sell his daughter to one who is pasul, it can't be, because the pasuk already says that if she is raw, she is evil, she is bad, displeasing in the eyes of her master, and then the master did not do yod. So what do we see over here? We see over here that if the master is a pasul, the master is a pasul. So we see that clearly the father is able to sell her to someone's pasul. Shara b'nisuin. It means that the marriage would have been ra b'nisuin. What does mean ra b'nisueha? It means it would have been pasul. There's different ways of being ra. This could be ra, that it's just displeasing, it's not enjoyable. Then there could be ra, that it's actually pasul. So says the Gemara from the fact that the pasuk says in ra b'nisueha, it's referring to Ra bin Isuel. So matam eleimer liyama. So why does the pasuk say liyama melamed? This teaches us shamachra likrayvim. From here, the actual word of lama. This is where we learn out that the father has the ability to sell her to krayvim. And obviously, what's the chiddush? And again, this is a bit of a chazar of the previous end of last year. Bring us into this year. The Tab Rashi spells out the chiddush of Krayvim is because the Krayvim can't do yiyud. Because of course one cannot marry a relative. So even though ein kan yiyud, even though there is no yiyud, the chiddush is that the father is still able to sell her, to Krayvim. But says the Gemara, why do we need psukim? V'aleidinu, it's a kal v'chaymer. If he's able to sell her to psulim, of course he can sell her to krayvim. And the Gemara says no. When it comes to selling someone who's pasul, that if such a master would want to do yiyud, he's able to. It's an aveira, but he's able to. Could he sell him to krayvim? It would not be able to work. There's a very fundamental difference between selling pasul and when the Kiddushin is not chal. When it comes to a relative, it's aser, and if the relative were to try to marry her, what would happen? Nothing. Kiddushin is not chal. Ein Kiddushin ta'if simba. But when it comes to someone who's pasul, it's an aveira. But the Kiddushin would be chal. The Kiddushin would go into effect, and that is the reason why Amar Kra le'ama, 5 lines down, Chaf Amud Aleph Lamed Shamaychra le'krayvim. Says the Gemara. So what does Rameir do? Rameir lepsulim nafklei meichad and nafklei Rav Elazar. Rav Meir learns out psulim where Rav Elazar learns it out. Bekrayvim savala k'Rabbanan. When it comes to krayvim, it also the Rabbanan, who are the Rabbanan Da'amri Ein Meichel Krayvim, the Rabbanan Lameiser of the opinion that he's not able to sell her to Krayvim. And wrapping up this first part of the shir, which is really the conclusion of the previous shir, says the Gemara that we have a bunch of braisas that get involved over here. Tani Chada, one braisa teaches us Meichel Aviv. One brisa teaches us he can sell his daughter to his father, but he cannot sell the daughter to his son. And another brisa says, and of course these are all cases of Kroivim that cannot eventually marry her. And again, the fundamental idea we're discussing is a father has the right to sell his daughter as an Amma Avriya, as a maidservant to a master. But there's a second din that a master has the right to do yiyud, which means to marry the maidservant. So says the Gemara, when you put those two things together, we're going to run into an issue. Because if the father sells the maidservant to someone who's a relative, they can't do yiyud, so maybe that precludes the whole sale. So one brisa says, Marchlav min Marchlav b'nai. Tani idach, ein meichel loylaviv loyla can't sell to either. So says the Gemara, Bishlam, I understand, ein Marchlav loyla b'nai. Kirabanan. That's like the sheet of the Rabbanan that said, you cannot sell this girl neither to the father nor to the son. Why not? Why not? Because both are Kroivim, and both are Apostle, and both would not allow for the Kiddushin to be Chal. So that's the sheet of the Rabbanan, and therefore it makes sense why you cannot sell to either. Ella asked the Gemara, what does that first brisa mean? Ella meichel avim in merchel b'nai kiman. Like your Rabbanim, like Rav Eliezer. Trevor, you put it, according to Rav Eliezer, even though it's Aser, he allows the sale to Kroivim. According to the Rabbanan, he never allows a sale. So how are we making this split? What is this dichotomy that you could, yes, sell to the father and not sell to the son? Explains the Gemara, Leilam K'Rabbanan. Really, we're going with the Rabbanan, but there's one case that's very unique. But in the case of Meichel Aviv, of course, there's a tzad yiyud that within the realm of a father, there could be a potential case of yiyud in the case of a grandfather. That's why, according to the Rabbanan, the sale would work. We'll look at Rashi. It's a little bit complicated, but Rashi on the second narrow line speaks out. So one is always Aser, one is a Tzad Yod. Says the Gemara, that is going to be the fundamental difference. So we continue. Chav Amid Aleph, about 12 lines down, the two dots. Tanu, Rabbanan, going back to more of the fundamental dinim of an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave. Im begaboy yavoy begaboy yetze. Says the Pasuk, if he comes a begaboy with his body, he goes out with his body. Im begaboy yavoy begaboy yetze begufay nechnas begufay yatsa. This means he enters into the servitude, he enters into becoming an Eved, a slave, with his body. He has to leave as such. Rav Lezer ben Yaakov Aimer Yechidi nechnas Yechidi yetze. No, he comes in singular, he leaves singular. So explains the Gemara, what's going on over here? What's the Tanakama teaching us? Amar Rava teaches Rava. Loimar, this teaches Ashena Yaitse. Beroishe Evarim Kevet. He will not leave with the Rashi Evarim, literally the end of his limbs, like an Eved Kenani, which is the psukim that teach us that if one knocks out the eye or the tooth of an Eved, he has to set him free, or any other of the 24 limbs. But over here we're saying the Eved has to leave with his body intact, and therefore we learn out that no, he would not leave with the loss of a limb. Amarle Abaye asks Abaye, no. We already knew that halacha. The halacha is true, but we don't need to learn it from this pasuk. We learn this out from explains the Gemara. If we only had that pasuk, you know what I would think? I would think give the value of the eye, v'nefuk, and then he should go free. Kamash malan, meaning if he only had the pasuk of I would have thought that there is a difference between an Eved Ivri leaving an Eved Kenani. That the difference would be you have to compensate for the loss of the limb, and then he goes free. Kamash malan and Megabba Yava, Megabba Yetze, then no, he doesn't go free with the body being damaged. Continues the Gemara. Rav Lazar ben Yaakov Omer. Yichidi nechnas yichidi yetze ma yichidi yetze. What does that mean? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak achi kamar. This is what the pasuk means. Yesh lo isha ubanim. If he entered into being a slave with a wife and children, then the master is allowed to give him another wife, a Kanani woman, as a wife in order to bring children for the master. But if he entered in without wife and children, in Rabba Moslai Shivcha Kinanis. Tanu Rabbanon, another din of Eved Ivri, a din that we've spoken about many times. We delve a bit deeper. The din of Girayon Kesef. Tanu Rabbanon, 6 lines from the wide lines. Chaf Amid Aleph. Nimkar b'imanav, an Eved is sold for a mana for $100. V'ishbiach v'amad al matayim, and he appreciates in value, and now he's worth 200. Menayin shein machashin lo yelamana. How do we know that when it comes to the Eved evaluating himself and paying for the remainder of his value and leaving, we go by the original value? Shenemar mikesef miknasai, goes from this value of the sale. Nimkar b'matayim ve'echsev v'amad almana. What if you sold for 200 and depreciated, and he's worth 100? How do we know? We go by the current value now, not the original value. So these dinim are only clear in the case of a Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave sold to a guy, since he could be redeemed with his relatives. Therefore, what? The yad of the master is al tachtoina. That's why the Eved is going to gain in both cases. But Nimkar li Yisrael in the first wide line, Minalan, where do we know that Nimkar li Yisrael is going to have the same dinim? That the Yad Adain will be al tachtoina. Tamaloymar Sachir Ligzir Shavo. That's the Sachir, which really brings us back to the beginning of the Sugya of Avadim that we learned in Daf Yudalid, that it equates Eved Ivri to Eved. Excuse me, Nimkar li Yisrael to Nimkar la'akum. Omar Abaye, Hareini Benazai B'Shokte Ve'Eria, says the Brais. I'm like Benazai, sitting in the marketplace of Severia. I'm like Rabban Labaye. So one of the Rabbanan said, really, you like Benazai? You can answer any questions? Mechti. Let's see. Hani Krai, Ika L'Midrashinu L'Kula, Ika L'Midrashinu L'Chomra. My Chazes, Didarshinu L'Kula, Didarshinu L'Chomra. These psukim that we just quoted the previous Brais, how do you know they're coming to tell us L'Chomra, not L'Kula? Answers the Abaye, Los Lagadaytach Med Akil Rachmana L'Gabay. Because we see in other cases that the Torah was more Meko with an Eved Ivri. Therefore, we assume in this case as well to the Arsh of the Psukim L'Kula. Titania, what's the source that we're more Meko by an Eved Ivri? Kitayv La'imach. A din that we've quoted prior, now we get to see a little bit more. It says in the pasuk that it should be good with him. He should be good with you. Imach b'meichel, imach b'meishel shleitei ato eichel pas tekiah v'hu eichel pas kibur. You have to give the Eved the same quality of food that you're eating. Ato sheziyayin yashin v'hu sheziyayin chadash. Ato yoshin al gabi meichel v'yoshin al gabi eteve, and he has to have the same bed as you. Mikan amru kol hakon Eved k'ivri k'koine odoin liatzma. It's like you bought a master, you have to treat him as well as yourself. Asks the Gemara, wait. Maybe that's only with regard to food and drink. And the reason being because you don't want to cause the Eved pain. Maybe when it comes to redeeming the Eved Ivri Nachmar Alei, maybe really we should be machmir on the Eved. Explains the Gemara, Midr Rav Yossi Rav Chanina the Tanya, we learned in a Brai service, come and see. Kama Koshav Koshel Shvi is how terrible is even the dust of Shemitah. Adam Naisim Beir Shvi is a person that does business with Shemitah. So if you know what's going to happen, Moicher as Metaltalav, he's going to have to sell all his movable properties. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Bishnasa Yovel Tashuvu Eshal Chuzasa V'Samach Land. The pasuk nearby says, Chisim Kumim Karlam Yisecha Kanal Miyanav Yisecha. If you're going to sail, Davar Aniktam Miyanav Yaz. So about something that's acquired from hand to hand, which is what? Metaltalin. Like here, if he doesn't realize his Avera that he did, he doesn't feel it. So if you know what's going to happen, he's going to continue to spiral out of control. And Meicher Sadais, if he's have to even sell his field, and he's going to keep on going till he sells his daughter. Basically, his house. Says more 1 second. The first line of the Braisa said if he doesn't feel it. Then it said if it doesn't come to his hands. Explains the Gemara, Kidder Ravuna, Damer Ravuna, Kimish Avaradam Avera, Vishana Boy Hotralai. A very important aside, especially here as we stand in Elul 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah. We have to be aware that when one does an Avera and he repeats it, you know what happens? Hutralai becomes mutter to him. Hutralai is al-Gedaitach. Really? It's not really mutter. What do you mean? Ella says, well, you're right. Nasa like a heter. It appears to him like it's mutter. Loi basli yadai. So stage number 2 is he sells his house. Stage number 3, he sells his daughter. V'avgav de bita, like Sefer doesn't say daughter b'hayin yana kamash lan nizvin inish baratev lan inish berabite. Even though it doesn't say daughter in the pasuk, still we learn how a person rather sell his daughter and not borrow lo nizif berabise, not lend with ribis. My time barise migra vinavka, because his daughter deducts money and eventually she's going to go free. V'ha ma'asav hazla, but interest just keeps on building up and building up. So stage 3 is he sells his daughter. Stage 4, ad. Eventually, he feels like he has no choice. He's love of bridges. He lends with Ribish. Samach len we put near to here. Altigach meitoi neshach betarbis v'chaymer v'gulu v'chaymer v'chulu. Lo bas the other shevaycher. That's when finally Rachmana litzlan he sells himself. Shenemar kiyamach achicha v'nimkar lecha. Loi lecha ela liger shenemar. Liger v'lo liger tzedek, el liger toishav shenemar, ger toishav mishvachas ger, zeu akum, kshoimer, zeu akum, za'akum, kshoimer la'aker, when the pasuk says that la'aker, to an idol of the family of the ger, ze'a nimkar la'akum, that's why this is actually someone who sells himself la'akum, he sells himself to the avodah zara. So what do we see from this whole long lengthy brisa? We see that he does one Aveira and then it's a slippery slope all the way down until he sells himself to an Avodah Zarah. And with this, the Gemara answers that I understand why we're being more machmir regarding the pediyah, regarding the redemption. So says the Gemara, so based on this brisa, we would assume that we should go l'chumra in the case of Eved Ivri. So why in the Braisa did it seem that there was a Makaim Kula? Amar lei asam ajakra. Explains Abai over there. The pasuk repeats the Tani Rabbi Yishmael. Hayel v'halach zev inaseh koimer la'akom. This person went all the way. He actually became a priest to the idols. Ema litzchi even acher anoifel. So we say push down a boulder after the one that is falling. Basically ignore the fact that he was once a Yid, deny him the opportunity of being released, and let him rot away in servitude. Talmud Loimar, that's what you would think, because this guy stoops so low. Talmud Loimar, achrei nimkar gula tieloi echad me'echav yiga lenu. And therefore we see that even if one went down all the way, and he sells himself to an idol itself, still, says the Torah, we have to have Rachmanos, and therefore that's the reason why we're darshaning with regard to Pediyah in a Mekel manner. Ask the Gemara again, Ve'ema Geula Tialoi, Ke'echidol Litame Bein Akam. But maybe the reason why in this case we're being Mekel is because this guy is even more extreme than selling himself as an Eved. He sold himself all the way to the Beis Avodah Zarah. So maybe the reason is we don't want him to become Tameh by the idols. But maybe when it comes to just redeeming one who sold himself to a guy, we're going to be stringent. Says the Gemara, good question, and rather new Mekar. Amar Rav Nachor Yitzchak Trey Kroi Ksivi. We have two psukim. Ksiv and Moed Rabbi Shanim. One pasuk says there's still a lot of time left. Uksev imat nishar shanim if there's not a lot of time left. Chayei shanim irubais shanim uatais. Says the Gemara, what does it mean? You have a great year, you have a small year. Ella nisrabu kasvay mikasav miknasai. Rather, the pasuk is teaching us if the value became great mikasav miknasai, then it goes by the original purchase price. Nismaid kasvay, then kifi shanav. So the Gemara is answering the way that we know how to calculate the Geraya in Kesef is learned out directly from the Psukim. It's not simply that we're looking to be Mekol, but rather this is how we darshan the Pasuk. Asks the Gemara, 1 second, maybe this is how we learn the Pasuk. Hey, chidavet trey, upashle dalid. In a case where he worked for 2 years and 4 years left, nasle dalid mikasef miknasai. Then he has to give back the value of the 4 years that he didn't work. Of adalid upashle trey, but let's say he worked for 4 and only has 2 left. Then nesif ta'arti k'fei shanaf. Then maybe he pays the 2 years according to his value. And obviously the difference in the two cases will be if you're paying according to that which you worked, it goes by the original value. If you're paying k'fei shanaf, it goes by your value right now. Explains the Gemara, in kim nichtav kamraim oid rabbi shanim ima'at nishar shanim. My bishanim, for the fact that Paul says ima'at nishar bishanim is abukasa bishanim because of miknasim it's ma'it kasa bishanim kfi shanim, and it all has to do back with the original value. Continues the Gemara, and that is the sugya of Gerayon Kasef. Now, in the first line, Rav Yistar Shinner of Nachor Yitzchak Lani Krai Kisinai, he darshan the following psukim like Sinai. Says the Gemara, Boi minei Ravuna bar Chinina me Rav Sheshes. Ravuna bar Chinina asks of Rav Sheshes, Eved Ivri hanimkar liakom nigal lechatzayin oy einay nigal lechatzayin. A new sugya to close out the day, 3 lines into the wide lines of Chav Amid Aleph. Asks the Gemara, a Jewish person, an Eved Ivri that was Nimkar Liakum, are you able to redeem him in halves or not? Basically, if let's say you have to pay $200 to get him out for the last 2 years, if you pay $100, do you let him leave a year early, or is it all or none? Explains the Gemara. Geulasai. Do we learn the pasuk Geulasai? For there we learn now Geulasai Mistei Achuza Gamar. And what do we learn from Stei Achuza? Mistei Achuza, just like an ancestral field. Einoi Nigal Lechatzayin. It's either all or none. You can't redeem half of it. Avainami. This case says, well, when you're redeeming an Eved from a guy, Nimal Lechatzayin. Oy Dilma, or perhaps Lekula Amrinan, or maybe no, or maybe we say lekula, l'chumra le'amrinan. However, we do not equate with regard lekula, meaning maybe the whole din of nigel lechatzayin is only a kula and not a chumra. In this case, it's going to result in a chumra. Amar le, answers Rav Sheshes, lav amr tasam. Do we not say over there, nimgar kula v'lo chetzav, hachinami nigal kula v'lo chetzav? Just like we learned over there, you can only sell entirely. Just like when it comes to selling the Eved, this goes back to Gemara and Daf Yomi. We can only sell him for his whole value and not half. So too when it comes to redeeming him. Amar Abaye, based on what you just said, if you're going to tell me that you can redeem an Eved in halves, it's both a kula and a chumra. That what? Lekula zavni memeo yav lechamshin pal gadidame vashba chamshin pal gadidame. Let's say he was sold for 100. The servant gives 50 zuz, half of his value. Vashbach v'kam al matayim. Then the servant went up in value. Now he's worth 200. So and if you're going to say that he actually could be redeemed in half, Yavle may have an afik. Then he gave 100. Now he has to give another 100, and he leaves. If you tell me you can't be redeemed in half, then Yavle meya v'chamshin v'nafik. Then he has to give 150 right now, because all he gave was 50, and he has to fulfill the other part to make it to 200. So if you redeemed in half, then the first 50 redeemed 100. Now what do you have left? You appreciate it. You only have another 100. Or do we say that no, ein nigal lechatzayin? Or do we say nigal lechatzayin, and you have to give another 100 now? Ask the Gemara 1 second. But we learned the pasuk that if it increases from the purchase price, and therefore the redemption can never be more than what you paid originally. Even if right now he's worth 200, if the original value is only 100, you can never redeem him for more. Says Gemara, that does not a problem. Because you know why? Going to Iker V'zol V'Iker. He went up in value, went down in value, and then he went back up in value, meaning his original purchase price was more. So you're never going to have a case giving more than the purchase price, but do we say he's nigal lechatzayin or not? That's how we're able to find nigal lechatzayin likula. How do we find the l'chomra? Mishkas l'chomra. Zamdi b'matayim. He sold it for 200 yav me'o pal gidadami. He gives 100 half his value, and then if the evidence went down in value, will come al me'o. Now he's only worth 100. So you only have to give 50, and that's it. We're just a bikadin gabe. So Yavle Nilei v'nafik, and then he's going to leave as he already gave the entire value. So says Abaye, we have a way of explaining the shayla both lekula and lechumra. On a similar vein, asks the Gemara, Rabuna bar Chimna merav sheishes. Ha moicher Abaye is bati Yerachayim, someone sells a house in a bate Yerachayim in a walled city. Nigel lechatzayin. First cousin of what we just said. Can he redeem a house in half or not? Do we say gulas mistei achuzay gamar? Mastei achuzay no nigel lechatzayin avnami no nigel lechatzayin. Oy delma, or maybe we say hecha de gali gali, hecha de gali la gali. A classical shayla, how far we take drushes. Do we say that we learn out from stei achuzah that there's no nigal lechatzayin, or do we say no? The Torah revealed it by stei achuzah, so it's only applicable by stei achuzah, not anywhere else. So Amar Le Rav Shisha Spad min midrashay shel Rav Shimon Nishma shalayv v'gayal lechatzayin. He borrows the money, redeems, and he could redeem in half. The Tanya, as we learned in our Brayse, Gal Yigael Malami shalayv v'gayal lechatzayin. Amar Rav Shimon Matam. Says Rav Shimon, what's the reason? Just like we find by stei achuzah shava koichai, that his koyach is great. Shemigia you have a v'lei nigala. Chayzeres l'bayilel, the field goes back. B'yovel hura chayzeres bayilel b'yovel hura koichai, that what? Sheina loiva v'gov v'gol lechatzayin. Makdish, when it comes to Makdish, a hayra koicha shemigia yovel l'nigala. Yoitzel l'kayanim, Makdish goes out to the kayanim b'yovel. Yafa koichai shalava v'gayel lechatzayin. So we want to learn out one from the other. And basically from Rav Shimon, what do we learn out? Nami, and here is the raya. So too, when someone sells a house in the Bati Yerachayma, it's going to be the same din. Nami ahel v'hura kaychai. Since the value went down, Shimalu loishana tamima v'loy nigala nechlat, that if a full year passed and he did not redeem the house, then it's nichlat, it stays in the hands of the buyer forever. Yafa koicha, yet he has a great koyash level v'gol lechatzayin. So too it will be the same din that there will indeed be a gol lechatzayin, and that's how we're going to learn it out from the case of stei achuzah. We're going to stop over here. We'll do a little review of this last piece in the next year. Then we'll continue with the kasha of Rav Shishas.